if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have watched The Simpsons before watching every classic horror and sci-fi movie ever. Because the Treehouse of Horror ruined every plot and twist, which wasn't really worth it for a one-note joke. Thanks about Bart or Sideshow Bob.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Foreplay. No, we had a little bit of a hiatus there. We're all working guys. Most of us don't do esports shows anymore, but Richard decided to come out of esports show retirement to do the major, and so it's taken us a bit to
and then
reconvene.
I promptly fucked off on holiday for like the best part of a month as well. So what Monty is trying to say is it's all my fault, guys. So we just didn't
Hey, I was also moving around. Like, I'm in the States at the moment as well, so it's been tough. But we're back, guys. As promised.
Here. I kept the faith. I just kept, I kept it on. What happens in life is eventually you're just the only one left, and everyone else just betrays you and is left by the wayside. So
in classic fashion, yeah.
So as we promised you guys, we are going to do our first director arc here on Foreplay, and that will be the works of Denis Villeneuve. Is it the most timely anymore, considering that Dune has now been out for several months? No, but we're still going to do it because it's
just
great.
Been released on home cinema, so the next wave of people are going to be watching it.
Genius.
And also, if this episode's about Arrival, then it's irrelevant when it happens, just that it did happen. And if it always happened, it was always going to happen, and it was always simultaneously happening, just like this episode. It's actually this episode, Richard, right on time. Don't worry about it. It can never be late. It's impossible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Thematically woven in. So as you guys know from the last episode, or perhaps from our social media posts, the order of films that we'll be watching with Villeneuve is going to be Arrival first. Then we will travel backwards in time to 2013 to do Prisoners, followed by Sicario, followed by Dune. I know we said it was going to be the first Dune, but I imagine this is just going to be some sort of mega episode where we talk about both halves of Dune, most likely, especially because now what's great is that we can. So, Richard, your point is very timely because now that it's actually on home cinema, we could use clips from it, which is great.
Yes.
And I can watch it again, which is also great.
They do a blackout if the movie hasn't come out. Is that the logic?
Well, we just can't access the clips if it's still in the theaters. Right?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I gotta be honest as well. It's like it's sat with me for a while now, and I'm kind of, I know it's not the appropriate venue to talk about it, but I'm kind of underwhelmed with both Dune movies, honestly.
I mean, we've talked about in the past that none of us really liked the first one, but that the second one was much better. But I mean, all of us have read the book, so there's going to be a level of disappointment, though.
Well, I rewatched it. This is why I know it's on home cinema. I rewatched it in the comfort of my own home on the big television. And I guess because it was such a visual feast of a film, watching it in the cinema for the first time, it's like it pretty much just blew me away just to look at. And it can really stop you thinking about some of the other things. But this time I was more dialed in on performance, and I'm revising it down to a 7 out of 10, actually.
Oh boy.
Neither of them are great films in my opinion, but the second one's way better. But I actually think the first one's not that good a film. I didn't think on my side. I think it lacks a soul, the first one.
Yeah, the first was like a 6 for me.
Yeah.
And I thought
I agree, though. I mean, one thing we'll get into actually probably in this movie in Prisoners is I actually do think that's an example of where it's funny that's going to be a lot of Denis Villeneuve first films for some people as the Dune films, right? Because it's become this big blockbuster, etc. But I actually think that some of easily his weakest films. In fact, it's only the aesthetic essentially is what is
the vibes are immaculate, as the kids would say in Dune.
Yeah,
the vibes are crazy.
This film and Prisoners has the vibes, the atmosphere, and then like the depth, the substance to perform everything you want. So these two are bangers in my opinion that we're going to do these first two.
Yeah, absolutely. And and look, I think it's kind of interesting because as a director, he's gone from doing these smaller scale mood pieces, and kind of with each of his films, I think they've got bigger and bigger and bigger in scope to the point where he's essentially a franchise director now. It's just that the franchises he's directing for are pretty niche because, you don't really think about Blade Runner as a franchise, but I imagine there'll be another installment of that, whether Villeneuve will do it or not. Apparently he wasn't too happy with the results, but I think Blade Runner 2049 is a superior film to both of the Dune movies, honestly.
Sure.
And yeah, I have to agree that having seen all of his films, I think Dune is his weakest, and yeah, Dune Part Two could actually be conceivably his second weakest. They're not Lynchian disasters by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly the you can see just some of the issues, and I mean,
it's interesting though because like David Lynch, that was his first feature film, right? The Dune one. So I mean, he kind of
he'd done like Eraserhead and all that.
Okay, that's fair.
He done
maybe the Elephant Man. I'm not sure what he.
Yeah, he done the Elephant Man and I think Eraserhead as well.
Yeah.
But like it was the first big studio interference movie he'd essentially done.
By the way, though, that's a relevant point though, because I'll tell you what, this is an example of why you have to be careful what you wish for. Because I actually thought up till Dune, this director's almost never put a foot wrong. He's one of those ones that's killing it. And so then when people said like he's the one doing Dune, you're like, oh, this is a guy who could nail it. If anyone could, and I tell you what, it doesn't matter. I'm not biased in that sense. If the movie doesn't live up to it, doesn't live up to it. I think he's better with smaller films. He's better with things about people. Even Arrival, as we're going to get into, it might have all the grand effects, but it's an incredibly human story about one person and a couple of people and what happened in their life and what happened in the most minor day-to-day of their life.
Well, yeah, and out of all of the films that we've picked, I would say the films that we are reviewing, things like Arrival and things like Prisoners, and things like Enemy, Sicario, all of his movies that actually are about and Blade Runner too. They're about connectivity and what connects us as people, as societies, as groups. And I think he's very good at observing the dynamics of that. And I think if you take that strength and then you cast it as large, on a canvas as big as Dune, I just think that's kind of where his attention to detail for that kind of thing is going to get lost in all of the noise and all of the things you have to carry. And a criticism of Dune for me is I don't think any of the relationships in it feel genuine. Mm-hmm. I mean, and you can't really say that about any of his other films.
And you can't say it about the books either, right? And, the lack of Duncan Idaho, we'll get into this in Dune, but the lack of Duncan Idaho relationship with Paul was one of my biggest problems with the first Dune.
Yes, for sure.
Especially totally because, in future sequels, that actually is going to be highly meaningful if they continue to film these
But
movies.
even when Gurney turned up again, you're like watching it and you're going, they just don't feel connected, and that was like a big problem for me. That these were incredible, opulent movies with actually some decent performances in, not amazing. I mean, and frankly, some embarrassing ones like Walken and Dave Bautista, who just shouts in every scene and like it to the point of almost parody. But I think overall, like they just don't have a heart. They don't feel like these other films.
And I think you guys,
relationships.
It may seem weird for us to bring this up now, but I think you'll see through the films that we're talking about first, and there's a reason we're leading into Dune as kind of looking into his oeuvre, that it'll make a lot of sense because these are more intimate stories. These are very personal stories that he tells. And so the contrast is going to be very important, and you'll see exactly what he's extremely good at and why that may not really jive with what ended up happening in Dune. Not to say that he was incapable of making a great Dune movie. I just think you needed like a TV, a 10-hour long TV series instead of, Dune movies.
I might be willing to cede the point. It still could be the best adaptation of the source material yet. And I've seen every piece of Dune media. I've seen the mini-series they did in the early noughties, I think it was. Obviously,
I mean, that's way better personally, but whatever. Personally,
I think the problem it has is that the pacing is definitely better, and the storytelling and world building is definitely better. But it really lacks the star power. It doesn't have an actor that I can sort of connect to. Like, there's no like stellar performance in that. There's nothing as jarring as fucking Kyle MacLachlan trying to play a teenage boy. Right?
I don't know. What about Sting in leather underwear?
I personally like that. I thought that was great. Sting in leather underwear, abs, like doing the old dehydration abs trick, steaming, saying "I will kill him." Just perfect. Yeah, I love it. Love Sting.
Well, enough
anyway,
about Dune. Let's switch to Arrival. And the reason why we picked this one first is because this is another science fiction film. It's another science fiction film based off of a text. So in this case, it is a short story by Ted Chiang called The Story of Your Life, which I have not read, to be clear. But it is something that he is adapting for the screen like he did with Dune. It came out in 2016. It stars Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner. Are the probably two leads, what we would consider the leads of this film. And we're picking it because you get to see kind of his adaptations of science fiction 4 or 5 years before he actually makes Dune. And this movie came out, and I saw it pretty soon after the release and was really blown away by how good it was, especially as a very thoughtful, more hard sci-fi film, which are kind of rare, where it's actually very concerned about kind of the mechanics of linguistics that go into it and the mechanics of physics and everything else. And so it really is excellent. And the basic premise of Arrival is effectively there are all these extraterrestrial spaceships that enter the Earth's atmosphere, and they're kind of all around the world. They come at various points. So various different nations and governments are interacting with them, and people are going inside of these ships and meeting the aliens and trying to translate what they're saying. And they look kind of like giant squids, and they shoot ink in that forms into circles, which is their language. Amy Adams plays a linguist who goes in with the help of the American military, alongside Jeremy Renner, who plays a physicist. So they're both in there trying to decipher the language, figure out what these aliens want. They're collaborating with other governments around the world in order to share and pool information until people inevitably get scared and start turning against each other. And so it's kind of the story of unlocking the mystery about why the aliens are on Earth, what their intentions are, and trying not to panic and have a panic response to the information that they're given, which some of the other Earth governments do, and kind of the collaboration breaks down, and then figuring out what they're saying. Because at the end, you find out that the aliens are there to give them the technology of their language effectively, because they are fourth dimensional beings, which means they don't exist in a single place in time. And knowledge of the language actually helps break anybody out of living in linear time, which we find out with Amy Adams, because she's having kind of visions of this daughter that she is going to have with Jeremy Renner's character, who eventually dies of some sort of childhood cancer or other malady. And so a lot of this is, the narrative is not linear within the film, because it's actually flash forwards a lot of the times. And you don't really figure that out until the very end. And the reason why the aliens come and give this language is because they say that in the future that they will need humanity's help themselves. So they need to give them this technology to kind of advance them and unify them now. So it's a super interesting premise. If you like sci-fi, you will love this movie. It's extremely well done.
Which I think was in addition to the movie, by the way. I think in the short story, I didn't have time to reread it before we did this, but if memory serves me correctly, in the short story, by the end you're none the wiser as to why the aliens came and went. I'm pretty sure that's a component.
It is kind of a throwaway part of the movie, honestly, but
yeah. Well, I think I understand
the part with the daughter and stuff. Is the
no. Why the aliens
film?
came, where they say we need your help in the future. It's a very vague, like one-liner that happens.
Okay, yeah, true.
Yeah. I think that was probably added in the movie to kind of just give it a bit more of a satisfying feel. But I could be wrong. I might be misremembering.
By the way, I'll tell everyone, since this is going to be quite a heavy episode, I'll tell everyone an amusing Thorin anecdote from my life. Not something I usually do. So this was actually one of the first films I watched when I was in the Netherlands, where I now live, right? And this is the mistake I made, guys. It's brilliant being in the Netherlands because they don't dub films. Every film is in English. But see if you can think where I'm going here. So I'm watching the film, mega film, gets to that scene later on when she goes aboard the ship. Subtitles in it. It was all in Dutch. So I watch it, and I don't know. Listen, I barely know Dutch now, mate. They say all that shit like, he is dude, which is like dead or whatever. So, and I'm going, fuck, what could they be saying? And because it's on the cinema, I can't just go look up, can I, what the fucking thing says? So I had to wait ages to find out what actually happened. That's why you are right, Monty. That part wasn't that relevant. The rest of it all worked. It all did, like the daughter thing. You sort of figured it out eventually. It's to do with like language and stuff. But I actually never got to know what the fucking heptapods were saying in their language for like a month or something until I found like someone on the internet just written it like, oh, thank God. So I got bodied by that. I got actually fucking wrecked. That was the only angle I didn't think through. Bloody subtitles in it. Bloody subtitles. Yeah. They've done me. But that's how you know it's a fucking good movie. I didn't complain and go, shit movie. Like, it wasn't bad. Because, by the way, speaking of Denis Villeneuve, one of the things, because this is the first of his movies I think I saw this, then I went back and saw Prisoners and saw Inscar and went backwards, right? And I have to say, because of watching this film on the cinema, which I actually didn't know anything about the director at the time, it just sounded like an interesting film. I remember thinking, I am going to watch every movie this person does on the cinema, because actually one thing this already has, which carries throughout Dune, etc., obviously is, like, it literally has all the things you want in a massive cinema, like giant scenes and like fucking crazy scope. The soundtrack, like if you watch that on like a fucking laptop screen or a plane, you are a cunt. Like, you will never appreciate what that feeling is like, because like that is probably the best part of some of these films. Is like the aesthetic is crazy when it hits.
It's also that Villeneuve is really just a master. I mean, there's things that I notice very specifically when watching his films that do kind of demand that they be seen in a larger format. One of which is just his excellence at landscape shots, whether it's drone or helicopter shots, where he gets these crazy broad landscapes. His use of color is also phenomenal. He really saturates his frames with single colors a lot of the time, or single color palettes. And then the way he uses shadows, right? He's not afraid to have like highly, like almost chiaroscuro levels of shadows on actors' faces. So like the interplay between light and dark is just brilliant. And I mean, that's just a through line throughout all of his films. And it does make it much more satisfying, because he really just has an eye for, these beautiful shots, and they're much easier to appreciate on large format media.
I also think, by the way, that to me, like one of the things about this that defines this film is, it's funny, people are going to get caught up on the plot and the mechanics of it and how well is it done, or do you understand, does anyone actually really understand quite how the plot works at the end and how it's sort of like you exist throughout time and stuff like, some of that seems like, I mean, the premise is it almost works because we can't see things that way. We have to just sort of take it like, oh, I guess that does make sense. But like this movie nails the atmosphere, because think about how badly in the modern day with CGI, you can fuck up aliens. And you can fuck up an alien ship. And that first scene when they go into the ship the first time and like gravity goes sideways and then they come in and you only get to see a bit. It's like and like the mystique of it is fucking amazing. Like the atmosphere is dripping off the screen. And you are just like, I would say this, by the way, this and for Prisoners, one of the words I have to use for both is just insanely compelling. Like once you're on that journey, you're just going full speed with the wind in your face the whole time. And you're never doing that thing of like, nah, it's taking me out of it. Actually, nah, fuck, that's fucked. I think the atmosphere in this film is fucking mega.
Yes, and look, the design of everything is great. They're not coming down in flying saucers or like
they're coming in bananas.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, it's interesting.
Actually, they look like esports awards, which is my favorite.
yeah. You can check over there. The design of the ship. There was a story that I saw where it was like there was this sort of strange shaped mass out in space that they'd found, and some scientists were theorizing it could be a ship, and that's like it was. Oh,
this thing that's supposed to be in orbiting for ages or something like that. Like
you know what I'm talking about.
You mean, yeah.
And if you look at it, it looks like sort of just a giant seashell or something. And so obviously the design of the ships here are fucking really interesting as well. And the design of the aliens themselves are like it's very alien. You know, there's like, obviously I'm a massive Star Trek fan, and you know, if you had to be real about it, it's pretty annoying that it is just a fucking human with a few bumps.
always
stuck on
human.
it
What are
already.
you talking about, Richard? They explain
I
that
know.
in Deep Space Nine.
No, I know they do. I know they do, and it's great. And it's great that they do. And look, I love Trek. They can do as many lumpy, bumpy humanoids as they want. But what I'll say about this, the design of the heptapods, is, I mean, like, whenever I conceptualize aliens, you know, as a sci-fi nerd, I always do think, like, you've got to really push the limits of imagination as to where they would be. And, you know, they look like they could be squids, but not quite. And they're shadowed in that mist because they can't breathe our atmosphere, which is probably another thing that would be true, obviously. And the notion of them actually physically producing ink for their language on, you know, special gravity holding fields. It's like really interesting stuff. And it's like,
And
it's like
visually, it's
nothing
stunning
else
too.
out
Like
there.
watching
Yes.
the
Yeah.
like ink
Looks great.
smoke, you know, make these circles is amazing to look at.
And
I give an angle
that's-
for you on that, by the way. You go,
Yeah,
on.
go for it.
You can finish your point for it.
Well, I was just going to say, it was actually to touch on your point as well. Like, this is a sort of masterclass in not trying to do too much and understanding where, you know, if you want to show someone a magic trick, where they would see the failures in the illusion, right? And so what they've done is, yeah, look, it was a relatively low budget film. We've got to shroud them in mist, but it's okay. We can write a reason for that. Yeah, we can't have, you know, big bells and whistle ships. We actually need very simple geometric shapes, but that's fine because that actually makes sense. And so what they've done with sort of so little in terms of budget is actually really, really clever, and the effects, they really hold up. I mean, you know, this is came out in 2016, 2015.
Yeah,
2016.
Yeah.
2016.
You know, and you think about the advances we've made, funnily enough, as showcased in a movie like Dune and Dune Part 2. And, you know, even movies from 8-10 years ago now are starting to look a little bit ropey for what we're doing now. And obviously before
And
that,
the
even more
other
so.
movies that have held up in this genre, you know, about aliens being aliens, like one of them is Contact, obviously, which is a much older film. But the reason why that holds up is they never show you the alien, because when the aliens talk, when the aliens show up, they're in the form of humans to not spook humans. So it makes sense.
Which in itself is the 90s version of a genius way to get out of doing
Exactly.
CGI. You go, no, you would only understand if we came in this form, which is like, it's just the actor who played her dad. Because I actually agree with Richard. Like, that's one thing they have absolutely nailed in this film. It's like, put it this way, I was not aware of that. I'm hearing this for the first time. I wasn't aware it actually had straight fire reference, if you know that. I actually wasn't aware it was a low budget film. I actually assumed, by the way, like, this is like Dune, he must have had fucking tons of money, because
it was
actually
50
all the
million
fucking shots look insane. Yeah, but 50 million is nothing,
Sure.
which is right.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a drop in the bucket for a film like this now. Like, he's right. I've never even thought of the fact that they've sort of pulled a primer, which is when you don't have the budget, just try not to show anything. Just tell us, make us believe from the atmosphere, infer it, and then you never need to show the thing. If you just showed Alien 24/7 from the beginning, you might have done an amazing job, but you'd need like 4 times that budget.
And I will add, it's also a pacing masterclass, because the first interaction with the aliens is so brief and so confusing, and they know they're going to have to go back. They're going to try and translate the initial contact and then see if they can communicate back to the aliens. And that's their primary task.
Dr. Banks? You can start.
The first interaction that you've been waiting for, that super nervy intro before you even see the aliens on screen, it's so brief, and then you're just waiting to get back and see the aliens again, and like, are they going to be able to crack this code? Are they going to be able to communicate in time? And what ramps up the tension in the spaces between the interactions with the aliens is, of course, the fact that there's this inherent lack of trust. We don't know why they're here. Why Why have they chosen the cities they've chosen? Why have they chosen the countries they've chosen? And obviously all the global governments are all kind of wondering whether or not they're a hostile threat. And there's this timer of when is humanity going to overreact and do something stupid? Because that's obviously what we do in any situation. So, and the fact is there's only like, what, 4 scenes with the aliens?
Like that. Yep.
Yeah. And so think of that. It's an alien movie where you have 4 scenes with the aliens, but every time they're trying to crack that code and get back to them, you're like really into it. You're so hyped at the prospect of them being able to break down these barriers and actually get the message across.
To rewind a little bit on the point about them essentially looking like sort of an octopus or something, there's actually an interesting detail there that people might not know, which is I remember this is actually something in some of Terence McKenna's talks he would often emphasize, which is the idea that even though I don't personally believe in evolution, it's the idea if you believe in the evolutionary concept, the thing that makes an octopus so fascinating is it's separated from whatever would become a human millions and millions of years back in like the chain of evolution, and like the divergences, like we went on 2 completely separate paths. They're in water, we're in land. Like we communicate through vibrations in the air. They communicate with like, well, actually it's slightly different. An octopus doesn't do like the ink to do the thing. The octopus actually on its body changes color to signal to the other octopus. And in fact, a detail people don't know, which is an interesting twist that they did on it here, is that when the octopus puts the ink out, that's like a razor ink. That's like, right, I don't want to talk anymore. Like I'm covering up. In fact, I don't want you to, because in an octopus's world, like who they are is on their outer surface to disguise your thoughts. Instead of like sort of covering someone's eyes, you have to sort of do the ink thing. So I actually thought even that aspect was interesting, because if you're going to go, like you said, down the route of how are you going to do an alien, but have it actually be alien. Remember the concept of alien we use in English, it's to mean the other, it's to mean something foreign, something totally different from us, something from outside, right? So if you're going to nail that, normally, yes, all you do is you put like a silly horn or like scales on a person, and all you're doing there, by the way, is just taking other animal elements and just compiling them with a human, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, they're gonna, that's why you don't ever have to really do, like you go, yeah, we've got a universal translator right now, everyone's talking English. Like that's just like the way all those shows work, because this is one of the biggest problems to overcome, whereas actually the genius here is this. What you've done essentially with the octopus idea is think, what would it be like if life had an evolutionary basis a la humans in that like carbon-based forms, but it didn't take the same path? Maybe the environment was different. Maybe like how they grew, maybe which animals took dominance and became the apex predators was different. And so as a result, you've tried to come up with an idea, which is actually a thing that actually, I mean, I'm going to get into him later, but one of my favorite comic writers, Alan Moore, does, where he doesn't just like write a plot. He tries to take the character, dissolve it down and rebuild it out, and then almost like imagine their whole history, a la like Tolkien, before he writes the story, so that he knows like the idea of like, right, it's not just alien in this sense. How would they ever even get to have a language that's so different that you couldn't even conceive of it? Like you couldn't just do what they do in this episode. You couldn't just go, bird, this is the symbol. Now you do symbol bird. Like, so if you do that, by the way, the movie's half an hour long. It's just the tension's not there. There's never anything to solve. You can't get fragments, which you then upgrade into more like wise things later in the film. So I actually thought even the idea of how to portray the alien was actually kind of genius. Like that's one of the strongest parts of this film. And it's why if you ever tell anyone to watch this film, don't tell them anything about any of those details. Like you will ruin the whole experience for them. Because I also agree, Richard, the masterclass of pacing is the tension release when they come out of the sessions, but then it has a different tension, which is the stupid angle, which everyone knows from Hollywood movies, that like the US military's taken over now. Tell me what these where the fucking bomb? Where's the bomb? Get Kiefer Sutherland. Where's the bomb? Like it's just that angle, isn't it? Like, and in fact, by the way, that's even itself just like the nature of the movie. If you know the movie The Prestige, at the end you realize, wait a minute, the whole fucking movie was a Prestige. In the same way, you very quickly realize not only is the movie told as if time was non-linear in a dream, like etc., but even things about the linguistic components. Like remember, there's a scene. One of the things you'll notice about Denis Villeneuve, before he gets to stuff like Dune, where it's not his material, he doesn't waste lines and have interactions that are meaningless. You'll find this out in Prisoners, by the way. There are so many clues in that film that you think are red herrings and throwaways that actually are telling you the whole time the plot, and at the end it all crystallizes. So in this film, they have that point early on. Amy Adams makes the point of like, when you only have a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. That is all the military does in this film. They spend the whole film like, right, when are they going to kill us? Why are they going to attack us? What's their weapon weaponry and why do we need to kill them and what they're doing with all the Chinese and bloody Russians. And by the way, I'll just throw this in there. I do love the aspect which the movie itself can't escape, which is they go to all the parts of the world. First of all, by the way, genius if you know the history of cinema, because I'm immediately thinking of Independence Day where they all come over all the major cities and what do they do then? Start fucking wrecking everyone. So already I've got the precedent of like, yeah, I'm a bit worried. Why are they over all these cities? And then when they do that whole thing like the weapon and stuff, well, I will say the part I did sort of laugh at, and this is one of the only moments when I look back that I rolled my eyes at, but at the time I was immersed, was, of course, only the people speaking English who are American scientists would ever actually be able to figure this out because they're superior. Those bloody Russians, silly old Ruskies, they'd probably shoot their guy. Chinese, they're playing mahjong, but the bloody hell they do. Listen, it's good for like setting the scene because I'm also from an Anglo context, so I can't understand their world and what they think, but that in itself did make me chuckle. That's the one thing that I would say is like a bit funny about the concept.
Also, to go back to the aliens bit
go for it.
Tying into the kind of paranoia is that, you know, to your point, you know, we know the Chinese are super paranoid about what's going on with the aliens and that they, you know, it's the different people they put in charge of these projects, whereas the Americans are putting scientists, you know, in the room with these people. You know, it's a Chinese general. It's a member of the Communist Party who is in the kind of leading everything on the Chinese side. And what I think is,
should have played League of Legends with him.
I mean, what I think is so interesting is that, I mean, this film is all about language, right, and how language affects perception. You know, to your reference, Thorin, they have that whole debate about, well, they said weapon, but do they know the difference between weapon and tool? Because and Amy Adams goes through and says, oh no, we have to teach them. It's like, general, it's not this easy. We have to figure out the building blocks of their language and then make sure that they know what we're saying so they don't give us wrong messages, right? But what I think is very funny is that they call them Abbott and Costello. This in itself is a language joke. So for you guys who don't know, Abbott and Costello were a mid-20th century, like World War II era comedy pair from America. And their most famous bit is Who's on First, which probably most of you have heard it. If you haven't, go listen to it. It's fucking hilarious. But the whole conceit of this is that it's two guys talking about a game of baseball. And the question is, who's on first? And the answer is who, because you find out as the sketch goes on that the guy's name is Who. But basically, it's two people not understanding what each other are saying because they don't understand the referent of the conversation. So it is, I'm sure that's, it was a joke also to the characters to name them this way because they don't know what they're saying, but it's not actually explained within the film. You just have to know Abbott and Costello to understand what the joke is. But it's also, by labeling them Abbott and Costello, you are labeling them not a threat. It's like what you would name an animal, right? Like a pet.
They have names.
So what are we gonna call them?
I don't know.
I was thinking Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, I like it.
And so, it's that this whole film is about language as perception. And so the approach that Amy Adams is taking and her character is to label them as non-threatening and to have an optimistic view of them. Whereas that's not true of all of the other countries that are interacting with the different aliens aboard these ships.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well because it's actually Jeremy Renner's character that comes up with the nickname. So
that's true.
I think it also isn't like it's illustrative of who he is because he's the military guy. So are we meant to be trusting?
Well, he's a physicist. He's a physicist.
Well, sorry, physicist. Yeah, but who's been brought in? But he's more establishment, I would say, than Amy Adams is kind of what I'm driving at. I think that's the way it's set up, and so it's a way of showing like that he himself is kind of like non-threatening because he's immediately labeled them, as you said, comedians. benign. He hasn't called them, I don't know, like something a bit more threatening or vague or insulting. He's picked like, two beloved, turn of the century comedians who you said have like obviously serves that meta joke up as well. So I think it's actually good because I usually don't like Jeremy Renner.
I'm not really a big fan.
I'm not a fan.
I mean, like as a dude, he seems like obviously like just a cool guy, but like as an actor, I mean, he's been very. He's like just generic man.
Well, it's also colored by the fact that he plays the worst Avenger, like the most boring Avenger. And I think part of the problem with Jeremy Renner is he's never really given much to do. in these films.
Yeah,
Like he is like
yeah.
the shittiest Avenger who has nothing to do in the Marvel movies. In this movie, his character is so boring. And it's just the way that it's written. I mean, The Hurt Locker is obviously the movie that he's probably the most famous for, but he's
Exactly.
still pretty generic in that one.
I think he does nail the tone in this, though.
Yeah, he definitely does. And I think it's a shame because actually, when you take him out of, these fucking stupid genre action movies that he's done, like he's in the Bourne series, he's in the Cape shit with Marvel.
He's in Mission Impossible.
Yeah, SWAT. Like he's done all of these films, and it's like actually when you look at some of the other movies he's been in, like The Town, Wind River is fucking sick. He's one of those actors who it's just a coin toss whether he'll be in like a good project or a total piece of shit. And in this, I found him really, really likable and endearing in terms of his performance, and the chemistry between the two leads is really believable.
I was just thinking about you. You approach language like a mathematician. You know that, right?
I will take that as a compliment.
Yeah, well, it is.
By the way, on the point, I've got one more thing to say about the alien thing, which is there's another great Terence McKenna line that this evokes within me, which is he always said that to do an experiment, like, again, by the way, I also don't believe in aliens. So his idea of like searching for extraterrestrial life and using SETI, where it's like in contact, like you send in a radio. He said essentially that's so like chauvinist to what a human is and what a human life form is like and how a human communicates. Like I said before, sound vibrations that hit the ball in your ear and that translates an image in your mind. Again, you'd have to have a very similar humanoid creature who would get that. His joke was that's like trying to ask also in outer space, like, do they know where there's a good Italian restaurant? It's like that's so ridiculously specific to you that it's of no value whatsoever. And even if there was something out there, like, why would it pick that up or know what that meant? Whereas, like, that's actually why I think the real genius of the film and the sort of magic trick of the film is the way you get drawn in for seeing her perspective, Amy Adams, and the fact that she's having these dreams. And as Monty points to, by the way, that is a masterclass, the way they weave the dreams into the film. So, for example, even when I rewatch it, the first parts, because I allow myself to like get back into the film and experience in real time instead of thinking too much beyond unless I'm taking a note, is you can easily, without being lied to, because I hate it when people violate the Raymond Chandler rule and just lie to you and show you a fake sequence. That's nonsense. You have to show me that I can misperceive something, as I do in Prisoners all the time because it's well done there. But don't ever like trick me. They don't do that. What the joke is, when you're seeing these sequences early before you understand the time component, it's actually very easy for the first half of the film to think that's the trauma that's made her become this person that now would do this mission. And it's only later when they tease things in, like, you'll have to ask your dad about that, or like, do you dream? And they're like, until you hear that stuff, you don't even start thinking, oh fuck, wait, was that what that was? I thought that was just like flavor for her character and who she is and why she's driven to do this and why it's so important to her to decode this thing. But actually, obviously, the real joke is that ends up becoming the real heart of the film and why you do it. So I thought that was actually very cleverly done as well, because if people don't know, another thing that they trick you with here is the red herring is the whole angle of your way racing against the Soviets and the Chinese. Because I'll tell you another precedent you have to know if you're from our generation, which is the whole Ronald Reagan thing of like, imagine if there was a threat from outer space that would make us all unite together. That's what they're trying to make you think is like, either we need to work together to get these fuckers because maybe they're dangerous to us, or we're working against them in case they give the Chinese the weapon or the Russians the weapon. But that actually is never what's ever going on. It's only our preconceptions and characters telling us stuff like that and then showing us like sequences of the Russians going crazy over something, or the Japanese, the Chinese are playing war games with all like. These are the things that make us go down that path, whereas the whole movie is about linguistics and how you see the world. And I actually think that element of the idea, it's because here's the thing, the perfect reference is the film Contact. They have a very similar attempt in Contact where the whole time you can't quite decode it, what they're trying to say to us, what's the message? It's technology. But if you remember in Contact, the angle that's the spoiler here, the angle that's the like reveal is that it wasn't 2D. You had to put it as like a cube, and then when you did, oh my god, then it worked as a thing. Well, the angle here is like the technology is the language, because as she points out, again, you think it's a throwaway line. Every line is a Chekhov's gun in a Denis Villeneuve film. When they explain that thing of like, whatever that effect's called, where when you start to immerse yourself completely in a language, you see the world through that worldview and like what that language contains and how it's structured. Obviously, that is the central thing of how the film is told, because the film's made to work that way, and obviously how the language works. Like, in the end, that is actually the most brilliant part, I think, is that you think it's about the hard sci-fi and it's about do they save the world? But actually, the whole movie hinges at the end on, does a woman make a choice that will break her heart and allow her great pleasure, but the greatest sorrow ever, and then that will save humanity. And that might seem like, if you made that at the beginning, well, that's an easy choice. No, it isn't. That's actually the hardest choice you'll ever make. It's not even about can you decode the language. It's actually about like the implications of what that means.
Well, it's also that the implications of the language are that humanity will start using it as a species, right? Which is the great unifier.
Yes.
It's the great unifier of humanity, right? And a lot of this movie is not only about lack of communication and lack of translation with the aliens. It's about between different cultures and nations, right? Because it's the entire mechanism of communication breaks down within this film. And, I think that's super important because it is wrestling both with, very large scale concepts of communication and humanity. Like, what are we as a species? How different are we? What does it take to unify us towards a common goal and kind of a benevolent and optimistic future? But also, it deals with the pressures, like you see the pressure of the aliens on the global political infrastructure, but you also see the pressures of this on individuals, such as very similar. You can't talk about this movie without talking about Contact, in my opinion. Just like we see the terrorist attack that also happens in Contact, right? Where you have some sort of, rogue person who is part of a cult or is acting out of fear, who is trying to destroy. In Contact, it's the alien machine. And in this one, it is literally attacking the aliens themselves. So you see that pressure on an individual. And then you see that pressure on relationships. Because the thing about Amy Adams, I guess Dr. Banks and Dr. Donnelly, who are Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner's characters, is that, it's this shared experience that causes them to fall in love. Like, would these two people have been in a relationship or fallen in love if they had met without this pressure? But they have this entirely unique experience that bonds them. And in a way, only each other can communicate and understand it because they're the only ones who are there the whole time. And they're the ones who are going through the translation project, right? And so in a way, this also allows them to have kind of a private form of communication and just a deeper level of understanding. And that's what this whole film is about on every level, from the geopolitical level to the personal relationship level.
You know what surprised me the most? It wasn't meeting them. It was meeting you.
Here's the irony, though, Monty, is that I actually think that's why I actually agree with Richard. I was going to say I'm not actually a big Jeremy Renner fan. Like, I actually don't even particularly like The Hurt Locker. I think it's just a bit whatever film.
Yes,
but I have to say, the reason why I thought he was excellent with the tone in this film is because I kept wondering early on, what is the point of his character in this, actually? Like, is he just another person to, like, be taught? Like, is he just Watson to go, what's going on here, Amy? What's fucking hell? But the language, shit, what's that all about? But he isn't. What he's there to do is he's the only other person, because even the, like, Forest Whitaker character is always the authority figure. He's just like, right, I can negotiate this, but give me something. Like, he's always working on like a negotiating type approach. The Jeremy Renner character is there to be the person you need in all these films. There's a very similar character in fucking Contact. It's Matthew McConaughey's character. Yep. Their job is, I don't actually know what the fuck you're really talking about. I can't really believe it in the sense I'm not experiencing it, but I believe in you. So I'm gonna support your idea, and I'm gonna fight for your idea. And so here's the irony. In the whole part of the movie that we see initially, he is the only person who seems to understand her on some level and can relate to her and trust her, etc. But what's implied that actually they only tease that and don't explicitly ever show is they never show you the scenes later when the daughter gets ill and she's like told him the secret that, like, yeah, I actually knew this would happen and our daughter would have like a rare illness and die in a horrific way. It's actually going to, by the way, it's going to ruin your whole relationship with her and with me. Is at the end, he can't understand her at all. Like, he even says the craziest line in this movie, it's a throwaway, is that he actually told the fucking mother, basically, like, you made the wrong choice choice. Like, you shouldn't have essentially come with me and had this child, even though we can experience all this joy, because he can't handle what the outcome's going to be. So the irony is his character in the first part is the only one to have that, and at the end, he's the only one who has like almost lack of communication and has to like go away from us. So I also think, again, like, I love filmmaking like that, where you've got like a symmetrical component or an asymmetrical aspect, or it mirrors, like, you reverse the dynamic of a relationship. So I also thought, yeah, it's another thing that, like, again, these look like just like throwaway angles early on, but these are all like detail strokes for when the bigger picture emerges.
I can't explain how I know, I just do. And when I told your daddy, he got really mad. And he said I made the wrong choice.
By the way, on the whole time thing, let me know when you want to talk about that, because I've got a whole little thing for you on that.
Yeah.
No
So
worries.
the time thing, I think you bring it up now, but to the point of, Amy Adams, Dr. Banks' character in this, it is almost selfish that she wants to have this child, because you have to remember that she is the one who's furthest along in terms of experiencing nonlinear time in humanity. So when her daughter dies later on, she can still experience all of the joy that she had throughout her father's life, or throughout her daughter's life. We don't know if Dr. Donnelly, Jeremy Renner's character, is able to have that experience. So for all we know, in his perception of time, it's just over, and he just has to live with that grief. There's no way to revisit the past in the same way, or like see all points in time in the way that
I'll hit you with the banger then.
Amy Adams can.
As always, I do sort of secretly think that, like, the demiurge of this universe might just be Alan Moore, and he just hid as like a comic book creator. It's like the way to find out about all this, because somehow all of his work that I was just reading, like Richard, as like a fucking nerd from like Forbidden Planet or like a weird comic shop or whatever, and no one else knew what the fuck he was. No one even knew what Watchmen was until about like the late 90s guys. Like, no one knew any of this shit. They maybe knew, like, I don't know, fucking... What would they even have known? What would they even have known about
Miracle
Alan
Man,
Moore? Maybe something like that. I don't know. But he was never, the comics were never mainstream. And therefore,
Well, I
Alan
mean,
Moore
obviously,
wasn't.
his Swamp Thing run was pretty
There you go,
well
that wasn't
regarded
bad.
as well, yeah.
So to me, the craziest thing of all is Alan Moore essentially has, for the last 10 years, talked about exactly this conception of time in all of his interviews. And his last work, in theory, his masterwork, magnum opus, a novel called Jerusalem, is all about this concept. And it's basically, I can give you a quick reference, but I've got another one I can read to you as well. So basically, what he's referring to is a famous concept. Monty will almost certainly have heard of it. It's called the eternal return. And it's that notion of Nietzsche, where I'll read out the classic example from The Gay Science, which, by the way, a totally legitimate thing to say. That's just the title of the book. It wasn't anything naughty. It's just what it was called back then. He had some banger titles, tell you what. And then in it, he said this famous quote, which everyone will have heard, even if you didn't know it's from Nietzsche. He says, what if someday, think about the difference between Amy Adams' character and Jeremy Renner's, and what I say, what if someday or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you live it, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon you spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? Essentially, she chooses the latter. She sees it as like a gift. The child itself is a gift, by the way. The time is with his gift. The fact that you, in a way, can always experience the joy and the memories. They're never taken from you. They're always there. But the Jeremy Renner guy, he can only focus on the end part. He can only focus on the idea nothing can be changed. You can't do anything about it. The suffering, but the suffering of it all. Like, it's two different perspectives, but no, it's the same exact experience. It's just a different perspective on it. And then similarly, Alan Moore had a way of explaining it. I'll just very briefly go to it. I'll let you guys riff, which is he basically explained, and here's the best part about this. Even though Alan Moore loves like science stuff, like he initially explains this with Einstein. The reason Alan Moore came to these conclusions, here's the banger, is he was balls deep in ceremonial magic, talking with demons for the last 20 years. And that's where he actually took this conception of how time would work and what in theory they told him, right? So he says, we are in a block universe that is eternal and and unchanging. That means everything within that universe is also eternal and unchanging. It means that we are not really moving through our lives. Time isn't there. Instead, our consciousness is moving through a solid medium of space-time. The best way to imagine this is as a reel of film. Each of those little images on the reel of film are fixed and unchanging. There is no movement in them. However, when we apply the beam of a projector to them, or the beam of consciousness in the analogy that I'm making, then Charlie Chaplin does his funny little walk and saves the girl and defeats the baddie. You've got action, you've got morality, you've got narrative, you've got events from static images. So if we are in a block universe that is eternal and unchanging, that means everything within that universe is also eternal and unchanging. It means that we are not really moving through our lives. Time isn't there. Instead, our consciousness is moving through a solid thing. It just repeated at that point. Anyway, yeah, you get the point. Like, his point was essentially exactly that. Like, this is why I say, don't worry about it. You're not, the film doesn't actually have to be real, guys. But I don't actually know if this brilliant contrivance does actually work. Like, for example, I do think to myself, so wait a minute. Time doesn't quite exist to them as a solid. They can also see the past and the present and the future. So they know that we need to save them. So they save us first with the tech, which then allows them to come and then to sit. Like, again, like all time travel movies or anything to do with time, you're always fucked on that front. It's always going to have an element that, like, we don't really know if it's real, do we? So you can't really do it. But I will say, in the suspension of disbelief for the film, I did think that part was brilliant. Like, I thought that did work. Because essentially, to me, Amy Adams in her personal life accepts that this is, even though she has this fucked up view on it and she could change things, certain things have to happen a certain way. And by the way, isn't that, if you want to draw it out and do an Annihilation type read, isn't that essentially one of the most important components of the idea if you're going to experience laws in life and trauma, is that you have to be able to accept and internalize it. You can't fight it and think there's a way out of it and a way around it and I can stop it from happening to me and it shouldn't have happened. If you do all that, you will forever be like a prisoner trapped by it. Whereas in a way, you have to accept in life, by the way, there will be sorrow, there will be joy. This too shall pass. There's that idea of like, it's all cyclical, isn't it? So I actually found this movie. This is why I said I can't even believe this guy made fucking Dune, because Dune that just lacks the soul. It's like not a very good adaptation of a novel. This is fucking amazing. Like Richard said, as far as I know, the short story's fuck all like this. Has none of this atmosphere and all. Great. It's just a cool idea. And he took that and weaved it into something insane. Like, I think this is actually a super powerful movie inferring about what life itself is about and all the sorrows you'll endure. Is it worth it, etc.?
It's like, I think it's similar to when we talked about Total Recall, where we went back and read the Philip K. Dick short story, which was a cool idea, but like the movie takes it to the next level.
Yeah, sure.
You know, the story is just kind of a throwaway in my opinion, but the film is actually significantly more philosophically interesting. And just a better, you know, it's a better expansion on that story. And I do think, you know, it is also, it shows how you change behaviors when you have this kind of philosophical realization and acceptance about, you know, the brevity of life and, you know, the concept of like hanging on to joy or dwelling on sorrow, as we see in Jeremy Renner's character. Because once you're divorced from the timeline, none of that fucking matters anymore, because you're always experiencing pain. And you're always experiencing joy because everything must come to an end, right? So if you're constantly seeing the beginning, middle, and end at the same time, then it doesn't really matter if the child, to Amy Adams, that the child dies, really, because she was going to experience that loss potentially at some point along the line anyway.
Isn't that what grief is? Isn't grief when you actually have an experience so piercing and powerful, just like love, that when you think of it and you think of that person, they're dead that second, they're gone that moment, and you can, unless you could somehow embrace it and just accept almost like it has to wash over you, you can always go back to that moment. That's why, to me, the war veteran, it is still Vietnam for him. That's why when the fireworks go, he's not going, it's like it, bombs go, he's back there in that moment. I mean, people might know there's a reference to someone in esports had this, and if when the firecrackers would go off when they won the event, he was under the table because that was like fucking missiles going off and artillery and shrapnel and people going, and suddenly his men were, and you're right back there, you're right back in that moment. That's actually the power of experience.
Yeah, I think as well, you know, lots to kind of like unpack there from just the whole perspective of time, and ultimately we're talking about free will, you know, philosophy as well, because, you know, she is ultimately making a conscious choice to not, well, assuming she's able to not deviate from the path, because everything's got to be in its right place so we can ascend into this future where we're able to perceive time in a totally new and different way, and the implication being that if we're able to save these aliens in the future, the heptapods, obviously we must ultimately ascend to becoming I would imagine, relatively unified space-faring race. There's an implication we're going to level up our tech, put
it was
aside
a prequel to Star Trek all along.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Which, by the way, I mean, listen, there is a little bit of that.
Sure.
I'll say, because think about who is it that she connects with in order to stop the attack? Well, she has the premonition of the General Shang.
Yeah, the Chinese guy, yeah.
The Chinese general, and basically she's able to stop him from attacking the ships because she's had a premonition of his wife's dying words. So you've got these like interesting mirrors going on, because ultimately you've got General Shang. He's already had loss. And
it's because he told her in the future his wife's dying words, which then she told to him in the past.
Yeah, exactly, right. And the words are, war doesn't make winners, only widows, which Duncan didn't get in the cinema. He got it in Dutch.
Exactly.
But
there you go.
yeah, but like war doesn't make winners, only widows. And obviously the fact that she is able to forge that connection with him by telling him that, there's people who are, giving up and sacrificing a lot ultimately to get us to this new, implied utopia in the future. I mean, think as well about when Abbott, the alien, gets blown up and killed and doesn't make it because of how the heptapods perceive time. He knew when he came on the mission he was going to die.
Right.
So he knows, like, Abbott's already dead, essentially, to him. He knows this is where it stops, but it doesn't ever stop because we're experiencing it all at once.
Does that mean also by the implication, because I actually did wonder about this detail, maybe you've brought it up now then, which is, you remember when the bomb's going to blow up, they just throw them out like 1 second before. Now, why would they detect that? Why would they know a number counting down? Yeah, I get what you mean, actually. They did it all at the perfect time,
Exactly. It's like, when you see, like, kind of, I mean, just from a storytelling perspective, the way these things are mirrored, so why wouldn't Dr. Banks, why wouldn't she? Why would she do something selfish? Because I disagree with Monty in the sense that while on a sort of micro level, it's ultimately selfish. Yes, to have a kid and the kid's going to die and the kid's going to suffer and Jeremy Renner's character's going to suffer as well.
I mean, she also didn't tell the dad, which
sure, but. Because everything's got to be in its right place.
That's what I took as it. Yeah, you have to take it all.
Yeah, and you have to take it all. And she's observed the aliens making a supreme sacrifice. She's managed to get this Chinese general on board. They're sort of grief bonding, essentially. Her grief from the future, his grief from the past. I think it's actually a lot smarter than even you might give it credit for.
Do you want to know something, again, that's just a little laugh to just give you a bit of levity for a second. So getting really heavy here. We talk about grief and so, right? This is where I agree. I think that actually, in terms of the script writing, this is one of the best films I've seen. Like, it's actually so well done. Like I told you, even the parts that might not make sense, I'm accepting premises like Aliens already to watch the film. Like, I'm already into the film. But this is what blew my motherfucking mind. You'll know that one of the things that's why I love Alan Moore is I love to know who wrote a film and who directed it. What else did they do? My jaw almost dropped through the table when I saw that the guy who wrote the screenplay wrote fucking Bird Box. What?
Yeah.
What? How is that possible? How is that possible? That can't be true.
He also wrote the 2011
Thing remake.
The Thing, Final Destination 5.
Yeah.
Did this guy just sell his soul? Or, here's the joke, did he have to make all those films and accept all those shit hackery films that he just did in Hollywood in order to make this movie, much like in Arrival, where he had to accept all the Fast and Future to get to the point where he could make a film like Arrival? It's genius in a way. In that way, I've redeemed the whole thing. It's totally fine that he made those shit hack movies that are terrible and doesn't look like he's ever written anything else good, so fair play.
Yeah. No.
This is this movie's well written as fuck. Yeah.
And one of the thing I want to talk about as well. It's a bit of a hard turn from
Go for it.
where we're at, but and then we could probably get back to the more brain bending stuff if you want. But I just want to talk about Amy Adams because I just fucking love her, man. I mean, I think she's just one of the best. Like, again, one of those, like, there's always she got unlucky with the Superman movies, right?
She tried her best in that, though. But she really gave an earnest performance in those films. No, she gave her best. Yeah,
none of that is her fault. No. And I just fucking love some of the things she's been in. Sharp Objects. If people haven't seen that, please watch it. It's like, I have never seen a more, like, just a real brave performance. You know, she's playing somebody there who's like, you know, like lost somebody that they care about. She's a functional alcoholic journalist. She's self-harming, and it's really fucking powerful stuff.
A little bit hitting home, was it, Richard?
Yeah, for sure, dude. And I'll tell you, like, Sharp Objects is like one of those, like, TV series that people haven't seen.
Oh, I'm gonna write it down. Looks good.
Yeah, it's fucking mega. I watched it again as a palate cleanser after Night Country because I just needed to remind myself, you know, look, you can have this type of drama and it be good, unlike Night Country. But anyway, no, I mean, she's just like, she's amazing in this film, and I think she's done like a bunch of stuff where, I mean, I loved her in The Master. I think
The Master is great.
Yeah, great
we'll
film.
Watch that on this series.
We will watch The Master at some point. Also, we'll probably watch Contact, to the point of we were discussing earlier.
I thought Nocturnal Animals, low key, was good. What else has she done? God. Because she really did a bunch of stuff early on. She was in isn't she the love interest in The Fighter as well with the Christian Bale movie? But anyway, she's just done a ton of good things, and I just think if you need somebody who's capable of steely vulnerability, I guess is how I would phrase it, I think she's actually perfect at that. I think, you know, she's never a pathetic victim, even when she's having terrible things happen to her. She's really good in her portrayals of finding the dignity and strength to kind of like muddle through. And a lot of her characters are like that. It's definitely her strong suit, and it's a strong suit in this.
Come back to me. Baby, come back to me.
It's a movie that, yes, it's ultimately carried by the fact that this is adult sci-fi, big ideas, not new concepts, by the way. A lot of them quite tropey, if we're being honest about it, but so well executed and with its own flavor and feel. But ultimately, I think she's a standout in a film where realistically, you know, this would still be like an 8 out of 10 movie if you just cast, even if the cast weren't as good as they were in the film, it still would be fine because the ideas and the screenplay would carry it and the look of it. But she is just fantastic in this film. And as I say, I always forget at the start, even having seen this a bunch of times, like I watched it baked today before the recording, and I always forget the fucking twist because she's just so good at bringing you into the here and now with her portrayal of the grief and how she has to go to work. And then you forget because the aliens arrive and it's such a believable arrival scene. It's just like another mundane day in her life that you assume is shit because of the thing that hasn't happened yet. And she just draws you in. I mean, she's absolutely fantastic in this film.
By the way, like I said, I actually think the red herrings that aren't red herrings early on, because they're just your own preconceptions from movie tropes, is also what makes the film become so fascinating. Like the opening scene where it's like, oh, put on the news, oh my God, aliens all around the world. It's like, fucking hell, how many times have I seen this? Yeah, all right. And then, the military's got, look, we're only going to tell you this, and none of the other information you need. Like, oh, fucking all right. And then also, like I say, the clever thing about weaving in those dreams so early on is I actually initially, like, I thought, like, right, that's the trauma that's made of this person when he gives a fuck about her job. And if anything, it's the other way around. She never had any of this personal life and family before. She was just some lonely academic scratching away at what she was doing there. And then the biggest gig ever, so getting the ultimate chance to do your job. She realized actually there's more to life than that as well. Like, she saves the world, but then after that, it's about having a family life, isn't it? And about like having more to a life in that regard. Even if, like I say, like by the way, that's even the genius, I think, of the family element. Every person who ever accepts a relationship or has a child is accepting one of you is going to die and the other one is going to be really sad and always think, fuck, that cannot continue forever. That you actually, it's actually baked into the terms and service of accepting that premise. But like every love affair, etc., you take that on knowing that the sword of Damocles is hanging over you, will drop one day, because you have to experience all the joy, and you have to have that vulnerability and be willing to be smashed into a million pieces.
Yep. Yeah. And like I say, I mean, she nails it. I mean, it's like it is tone perfect for this. And you really, as I said, the chemistry she has with Jeremy Renner, but also, you know, the scenes with her daughter, the interactions where she has that fractious relationship with some of the military, and she doesn't yield, she doesn't give in. She hits every single beat just perfect for the tone of the movie. There's never a scene where you go, that's a bit hammy, that's a bit unbelievable, or that's a bit too far, or I wouldn't have reacted like that. No, it's like it's one of those really natural performances, which again,
it's very similar.
With unnatural material. You know?
It is very similar to Jodie Foster's performance in Contact as well, because they play kind of similarly nerdy academic characters, right, who are struggling with vulnerability. And relationships. So I think Amy Adams' performance is superior, but I also think Jodie Foster does a good job. But it feels like an evolution of that character.
Yeah, and I would say this is what I mean again about it being tropey. There's lots of like classic little sci-fi references. You know, like Duncan's right to invoke Independence Day.
Oh yeah,
another thing I would also talk about. In this idea of aliens come, we don't know their motivations, what's happening, paranoia taking over. I mean, how many films have done that? Twilight Zone did this in its first series with the monsters that do on Maple Street. You know, this is, like I say, these are classic sci-fi ideas, but elevated to a really, really high level by a fantastic sort of central premise and a script that really has this great pacing. Because, as I said, when I was rewatching this film, I've seen it before. But I'm still drawn in. I'm still drawn.
Oh, it's never boring.
Yeah, and the rest,
exactly.
You know, there aren't a
second.
lot of characters in this. Like it's very limited. You know, one of the complaints I have about this film is not with Forest Whitaker, because he's a fucking great actor, and we know that. But it's like his character is just boring. He's literally just the mouthpiece of the president a lot of the time. He's kind of a cardboard cutout, as you guys mentioned earlier, of a military trope trying to control the situation. And he does a good job for what he's given, but the role itself is pretty one-dimensional.
Oh, this could, by the way, as Richard says, you couldn't change every other actor except Amy Adams. It'd be the same. Like, you could have Ed Harris playing fucking Forest Whitaker and saying the same shit, the same authority. You could have someone else playing Jeremy Renner. That could have been, like you saw, it could be Matthew McConaughey from Contact. Like, he's a bit of charm, but a bit of, like, you know, he's believing yourself. But the difference is, I also agree on the Amy Adams one. I hadn't thought that through, actually, which is, when we talk later about Prisoners, like, it's not just the film and the direction of the script. The performances also add, like, a massive emotional impact. Whereas, actually, if I'm going to contrast it with Dune later, I actually think that's what Dune doesn't have. Dune doesn't have a single actor who gives that iconic performance like that gets like to connects with the character and makes you come into their world. It's more like they are just acting out lines in a script and progressing the scene to the next scene and doing something from the book. Oh, I remember that, like that. I agree. Like, actually, it's not a film of performances, this. The others, like we say, like Jerry Renner gets half of a thing to work with. Forest Whitaker gets a cardboard cutout. The rest of them, you couldn't even name another actor in this film. You don't remember the guy who did the bomb. You don't remember the guy in the communications. You barely remember the Chinese guy, except he's just a famous actor who's played a lot of Chinese people. Like, and he nearly always gets typecast in that role, by the way. You barely remember any of these fucking people, but you'll always remember Amy Adams' performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, really, you know, I don't want to say carries the movie, as I say. I mean, that's not quite the right characterization.
I mean, if it was a different actress who had a bad performance, though, this movie would be dog shit.
It would definitely struggle, yeah. I mean, for
It'd
sure.
just be a flawed gem if it were. Like, if Jennifer Lawrence played her character, it'd just be like a good film, like conceptually, but you'd be like, I didn't really give a fuck about the woman, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, about what Harvey Weinstein said.
Jesus.
But yeah, but I think it's kind of instructive of how good a script we're talking about when realistically we're isolating one or two performances and the rest of it just doesn't matter. Ultimately, this is just a really compelling story that, again, the irony of it being a race against time, and the reveal is time doesn't really matter because it's all happening all at once. I mean, it's just a fucking really smart movie. Like, it's just...
You also nailed it, by the way. I was so sure after watching this the first time, like, there's no way this is going to, like, hold up to the rewatch because it's going to be boring. I'm going to know what happens, aren't I? Actually, I agree. It's equally as immersive.
Yeah, I was straight back into it, and just as I said, I mean, also just from a design perspective, I just think I know it's like little things, but it is this attention to detail. The movie essentially is what we're talking about, and I love that the heptapods, the way that their language is palindromic in nature and circular, and that's essentially what we're talking about with our, how space-time essentially works. It's just our brains haven't got there yet.
Like their ship or their bodies, their written language has no forward or backward direction. Linguists call this nonlinear orthography, which raises the question, is this how they think?
And it's just like little things. It's like to be cohesive and smart like that. I mean, you can tell it's adapted from a really smart story. The story just lacks any of the kind of traditional movie story beats. Like, for example, a little fact about the guy who wrote the story. Before he even put pen to paper on it, he just studied linguistics for 5 years.
There you go. He did the thing where you world build. That's cool, yeah.
Yeah. He just.
It's like the Tolkien shit where it's like, right, I better actually invent the whole Elvish language before I do it.
Exactly.
I even have a joke I was going to do, but fuck it, I'll just do it quick so we don't make it too long. Basically, I was going to do what she did in the movie where she lies about that story about how kangaroos became named. And I was going to say, Richard probably wouldn't know this, but I investigated. It turned out the screenwriter was really stuck as to how we would represent the language. And then what he did is he was in a diner, and then the waitress goes, "Another cup of coffee," and he lifted up the coffee cup and he saw the ring below, and he was like, and he saw the fucking, the way the coffee had gone around the outside and that, like, so he went, "Oh, that's it. That never happened." That was just a lie to nail that fact. That was a cool when he saw the language.
If you'd said that though, I
would have been possible. You might have thought it was real. You might have thought like that story she told.
So look, how are we doing for time? By the way, we still going? We
start wrapping it up, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I just also talk about the kind of the end. I want to talk about that and like how, like, whether or not you felt kind of
go for it,
satisfied and nourished with the kind of big reveal, because it's also interesting to me that it's essentially a twist movie.
Yes.
And we know that in the 90s, twist movies with Usual Suspects, just fucking, that was that. Every movie had to have a twist for about 10 years. And then it's like that it really fell out of vogue because M. Night Shyamalan happened.
He just killed the meme, didn't he? He hammered it into the ground.
Well, it went to TV, right? Because that's where Jonathan Nolan, who did Memento with Christopher Nolan and The Prestige, then he went to Westworld, and that's where, and now he's doing Fallout. So I mean, he's just brought the twist to television, basically.
Yeah, and so twists had kind of fallen out of favor. And yet, ultimately, in its construction, this is a movie that has a reveal that makes you go, "Oh!" And then you recontextualize the movie. And I think it's one of those films that, like a lot of twist movies, it does reward that second viewing. Actually,
yes.
You
like
get
I said, you see the sprinkled
experience.
Ingredients, right? That you thought were just whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
So I wanted to just talk about that and whether or not. So obviously, we can't talk about the first time we saw it. It probably isn't fresh enough in the movie, and you, Duncan, obviously didn't have a great experience anyway. But what about the second time of the ending? Like, how do you feel like it kind of holds up? I guess it's kind of like watching Fight Club or something. When you know the twist. How many times can you realistically watch the movie?
I mean, here's the weird thing about me. Like, I never care about spoilers ever. for films, because I have such a good suspension of disbelief that I will just forget the spoiler while I'm watching the film. And at the end of the day, I've read so many books, seen so many movies, TV shows, narratives, that it really doesn't even matter if I know what's going to happen, because the only thing that matters is how it happens and how artistically it's done. So it really never bothers me to have that foreknowledge whatsoever. And it certainly it didn't hurt my reviewing of this movie, because I think it is really well done. And in fact, it gave me more tools to examine the philosophy in the rest of the movie too, knowing that it was going to happen. Like Thorin said, there is always a Chekhov's gun. There are many Chekhov's guns within Villeneuve's movies. And I think you get to appreciate the foreshadowing more. I also think that it doesn't really ever bother me, because this isn't, if you told somebody there'd be a twist in this movie, no one
would guess what it was.
Would guess what it was. And no one would even expect the context of the twist, because everybody, if you said, where do you think the twist is going to happen? The answer is the aliens are going to attack, or the government's going to turn on them. It's going to be some sort of world shifting, like Independence Day epic battle. No one is going to say it's a personal decision for the character to have a child in a sci-fi alien first contact movie. Like, that is so out of left field, because you don't expect the twist to be totally within the human realm, totally personal, and really irrelevant to the aliens' arrival.
I mean, go on.
I was just going to say there's something kind of, ultimately affirming about where the movie wants to go, which is, we've talked about how, because you're experiencing everything all at once, you're able to, you're always having the good times, you're always having the bad times simultaneously, and through being able to perceive time in that way, you can access any point of it, even from even after you're gone, because you're not, and all that stuff. So yeah, cool. But I also think it's kind of affirming a kind of take this big story that's ultimately about what we're going to do in 3,000 years time, and to have this very small cast of people. One of the core concept of Lovecraftian horror is that we do not matter as an individual in this huge, vast.
We touched on that in our cosmic horror arc,
exactly.
Right? That is the core of cosmic horror,
and yet this is the antithesis of that. That the individual matters to such a profound degree, because we're all interconnected in this, long, far-reaching story that's happening. It's just over a time horizon we can't see. So, I actually felt it with this, watching this for this must be the 5th or 6th time. I really think, for me, the ending now just sort of feels like strangely life-affirming, even though we know Amy Adams' character is about to go through something horrific.
Despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it. And I welcome every moment of it.
Yeah, like I say, I actually do think quite literally life-affirming. Like, the message of the film isn't about science fiction time and all that. It's actually about, commit to, the good and the bad of life, and it's all part of the same fucking package. And you actually have to accept, like I say, because like I say, here's the thing, I have a take on that, right? Normally, in general, I agree with the premise, right? A great movie, it doesn't matter if you give me a spoiler. I will say, as probably both you understand, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have watched The Simpsons before watching every fucking classic horror and sci-fi movie ever, because the Treehouse of Horror ruined every fucking plot and twist, which wasn't really worth it for a one-note joke, thanks about Bart or fucking Sideshow Bob. That's the only rare outlier where I would actually delete that from my brain, Men in Black style, to enjoy all those films and horror movies. But in general, I agree. If a film is well done, it's like the Alan Moore thing about it being a permanent thing that always existed that way. It was always going to end that way. It always began that. But you re-experience it one frame by frame again. You're in the movie, and the best movie, you don't try to look at the bigger picture. You just experience it again through the linear aspect. You experience it through the character. And I actually think one of the reasons this movie works like that is because of what it's actually talking about human experience, which is human experience does have an eternal quality to it like that, where the sorrow is always there and the happiness is always there, and one has to come and one has to come later. And so I would give the two obvious examples. So in Contact, if you remember, the reason why you remember remember that movie isn't actually like all the clever things about sci-fi and the twist that it's a cube and then he goes through time and then you go to the third. It's that, if you remember, it turned out in that film, all that shit about her childhood was because at the end, when they used the medium of her dad, it's like actually she really wanted to just say hello to her dad one more time and have a conversation about what it meant to be human. And so the metaphor there was humanity is the child species, and these greater ones are like a father saying like, right, you're old enough now that we can have the chat. Basically, that's what that film is about. It's again, it's a human experience. And then here's the other one. It's the same reason why I took so many years to watch Interstellar the second time, because unlike if it was a movie with I know the plot, right? If I know at the end he makes it and humanity makes it, then none of it should have any emotional resonance. I know that if I watch that again, it would tear me up, because when I'm re-experiencing and watching those images coming through on the thing, when I know later on that time's passing in this way, when I know that like you're gonna have to sacrifice people and you can only pick. Even though I know at the end what happens, actually that is all still incredibly powerful. And when it gets to that last line, what was the whole movie about? It wasn't about humanity saving itself. It was about the idea that a girl knew her dad had come back because he said he would. Like this, it's how you. It's what people don't really get is we want all these sci-fi concepts to be clever and to entertain us and to distract us from life, but the best ones loop back in and are the most human experience you can ever have.
Yeah. Yeah, I really agree with that. I think it's an inherent issue with smart sci-fi, is that sometimes it can be too smart and therefore it's removed. There's no entry point for the average person. Like if you're not a nuclear physicist or a quantum physicist or, you know, an astrophysicist, or they're all physicists for some reason in this example, you know, there's no through road for the story. And it feels very sterile and cold because that's ultimately the field can be. But then if you think about, you know, that was the genius of Carl Sagan ultimately, that he could always take these incredible, like, you know, breaking down the vastness of the universe, all these things that are happening out there in the stars. And he could always kind of like link it back in a way that it sort of mattered to, you know, it was linked to human history or people who existed. You know, that's why when they tried to remake...
He had a brilliant imagination, right? And he was an excellent communicator. I mean, Contact, the novel that the movie's based on, was written by Carl Sagan, an astrophysicist, right?
Yeah,
he had a really unique skill set.
Yeah, and this is what I mean. I think like there's this real fine line you walk with sci-fi where if you can't link it back to ultimately who we are as a species, you know, who we are as people, what drives humanity forward, I think it can be. I think people can bounce off it. Well,
and that's why the original Cosmos series was such a smash hit. I mean, sure, it was pop science.
I was going to say the remake was just so sad.
You look at the cast. There's some
difference, I mean, listen, it was. I thought this was going to be a banger when I sat down to watch that, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I'll be honest, I don't really like. He talks too much. You know, he's one of them. I think
the difference is with Neil deGrasse Tyson, it feels like he wants to be a celebrity, whereas Carl Sagan, you feel like the joy of having other people expand their minds and knowledge with Carl Sagan, and like he just feels very humble in a way that Neil deGrasse Tyson never does.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. It's like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't know the word for it, but like someone who just has to be talking like all of the time about things and like always swerving all over the road as well. Like one of all the best scientists, all the people I've ever looked up to, ultimately they're experts in their field. Not that they'd ever tell you that, but also they very rarely get into another lane and LARP as an expert there. They're actually the best scientists, almost filled with the childlike wonderment of pure ignorance. They love to fucking be, you know, presented something new because that is ultimately the kernel of scientific inquiry, isn't it? And so anyway, I feel like Neil deGrasse Tyson unfortunately lacks that every time. I mean, even Joe Rogan's got sick of him, dude. Like, you know, Joe Rogan will just get baked and listen to anyone like tee off. But like the last show was like really, you could see Joe was struggling at how sort of insufferable it was. And a lot of what he said wasn't even correct. But anyway, what I will say is, He nearly won me over. He gave that wonderful, endearing story at the start of episode 1 of Cosmos, didn't he? Where he talked about how he met Carl Sagan when
That's
he was a
the
kid.
best moment of the new Cosmos.
And that's what I mean. I was like welling up, going, "Oh God, Carl Sagan, what a beautiful human being!" And I had no idea that Neil deGrasse Tyson had this relationship. Well, surely then Neil deGrasse Tyson will absolutely nail this out of pure reverence and love for this person that did him this wonderful gesture filled with human. No, of course not. No, it's just dog shit. So that was.
But by the way, guys, go watch the original
series.
Cosmos, because it was like a national, at least in America, it was like a national phenomenon when it was released. And, it's one of those very rare, like, let's learn about the theory of relativity that became like pop culture. It was crazy that he could do that.
Yeah, I mean and this is what I mean. Like he is someone who is very illustrative of what I'm talking about. Like, he is such a beautiful soul and so well connected to humanity that he can always link back these incredible ideas and this incredible knowledge set that he had. He could always link it back to the story of us, and that's what this movie does. It is Sagan-esque in that sense, and that's why. And I think all the best sci-fi is, I think by definition it has to be. Otherwise, you're writing something that is fringe and niche, and most people will bounce off it because ultimately humans, they want to believe in a better future for humanity. Sure, we've all got different ideas about what that might look like, or how we might get there, or how that might play out. But I think the key of sci-fi in a lot of, well, obviously not dystopian sci-fi, but I think even dystopian sci-fi has the fundamental belief in something better. Dystopian sci-fi is just the warning about what can happen if we don't aspire to that consistently.
And that's why I'm a sucker for Arrival, and I'm a sucker for Contact, and I'm a sucker for Star Trek, is because they are utopian future sci-fi that is very compelling.
Yeah, Discovery didn't happen.
I haven't. Richard, I didn't watch Discovery for very specific reasons.
There's absolutely no. But yeah, so I mean, look, I think this is just a wonderful entry in a long list of sci-fi movies that are huge ideas that are scaled down to the lives of the individual. And I think when you pull that off, I think it will always be a very profound experience to watch it. So this movie for me, it's a 9 out of 10 movie. And I think it holds up on multiple viewings. And I think this is the exact kind of movie, as Duncan alluded to earlier. If you ever want to give somebody a treat, maybe somebody who's watched Dune and goes, "Oh, this director's got a bit of a flair for the visual. I actually really liked it." Just say, "Listen, watch Arrival. Say nothing else. Just tell them to go watch it, and they'll be blown away." It's the ultimate gift you can give somebody, this film. I think it's just wonderful.
I'll just say it's almost 2 hours long, and it never feels long at all. It's so well paced as a film.
Yeah. And finally, we don't have reviews to discuss on this one, but we can talk about, it was nominated for Best Picture. It lost to Moonlight. Moonlight's a good film. But I think what's crazy is that Villeneuve was nominated for Best Director for this. La La Land won for Best Director, which I fucking hate that movie. So, and then also Emma Stone won Best Actress, and Amy Adams wasn't even nominated. So, feels like a missed opportunity there.
It's sci-fi has never done well in the Academy, really. Like, if you look at all the great like sci-fi movies and kind of the to the ratio of Oscars won, it never seems to do well. It's kind of like comedies, and how animation never gets the respect it deserves either. And like even how they still do this, like I think frankly embarrassing in 2024 thing, like best foreign film. Makes me fucking physically ill.
I think maybe
like,
when Parasite won Best Picture, we could have like retired that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. like can we now? Is it a really awesome story? Did you really enjoy it? Was the director talented? Were the performances compelling? Why are we putting it over here? Like, so you can squeeze more fucking American cape shit slop into Academy Award categories. But yeah, I mean, look, yeah, this film actually did. It's very weird because you can't even say it flew under anyone's radar per se. It was a financially successful film.
Yeah, it made like $200 million off of the $50 million budget.
Yeah, I mean, that's fucking mega. That ultimately tees up Villeneuve to get things like Blade Runner and Dune down the line, because he's shown he's a deft hand at taking, small budget films and making them, so if we give him a big budget, obviously he's going to make a fortune for us. But I think ultimately it still surprises me how many people haven't seen this film, and you really need to. It's a must watch.
Agreed. Well, guys, we will continue our Villeneuve arc with our next episode going back in time, because I guess we're just viewing Villeneuve's career at all points simultaneously, like we see in the timeline of Arrival. So we'll be going back to 2013 to talk about Prisoners. We'll see you then.